So there I was, just another Wednesday evening, craving something quick to eat. Subway seemed like the perfect choice. Something about those sandwiches always hits the spot, especially after a long day at work. I walked into the shop around 8 p.m. Not too late, but late enough that the place was almost empty. You know how it is, right? A few customers here and there, some eating alone, others grabbing a sandwich to go. The fluorescent lights made the place feel oddly sterile, which didn't help with the already weird vibe I was starting to pick up on. I went up to the counter, ordered my usual footlong, turkey, no cheese, extra pickles. The guy behind the counter seemed normal enough, maybe a little too friendly, but I didn't think much of it. He made some small talk, asking if I'd had a good day and all that. I just nodded, not really in the mood to chat. You ever get that feeling when someone's watching you, but you can't quite place where it's coming from? That's how I felt standing there, like eyes were on me. But every time I glanced around, everyone seemed too preoccupied with their own thing. I got my sandwich, paid for it, and found a seat in the corner, facing the entrance. I always like to sit where I can see who's coming in and out. It just feels safer that way. There was a guy sitting a couple of tables away from me. Looked pretty rough around the edges. Torn jeans, messy hair, the kind of person you might cross the street to avoid at night. He wasn't eating, just sipping on a soda and staring straight ahead. It was unnerving, but I shrugged it off. I started eating, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the weird vibe. But then something happened that really got under my skin. The guy behind the counter, let's call him the friendly sandwich artist, kept glancing over at me. Not just once or twice, but constantly, like he was waiting for me to do something. It was subtle at first, just a quick look here and there. But then it got more intense, like he was sizing me up. I started feeling uneasy, but what was I supposed to do? Confront him? Seemed like overreacting. As I sat there, trying to enjoy my sandwich, I noticed the other customers. They seemed off. You know when people look normal, but there's just something not right about them? That's what it was like. One guy kept twitching his leg uncontrollably, tapping his fingers on the table in this erratic rhythm. Another was just sitting there, staring at her sandwich like she didn't know what to do with it. And then there was the guy near the entrance, the rough-looking one. He wasn't looking straight ahead anymore. He was looking at me, eyes dark and hollow, like he could see right through me. I tried to focus on my phone, but my hands were getting sweaty, my heart racing for no reason. I texted a friend, just something casual to make it seem like everything was normal. At Subway, getting dinner, I typed. No response. I waited a minute, checked my phone again. Still nothing. Weird. Usually she replies within seconds. The sandwich artist came over to the table next to mine, pretending to clean it, but he was definitely checking me out, watching my every move. I looked up, met his eyes for a second, and he smiled. Not a friendly smile, though. More like a smirk, like he knew something I didn't. He asked if everything was okay, if I needed anything else. I just shook my head, muttering that I was fine, trying to focus on the half-eaten sandwich in front of me. And then I noticed it. The cameras. You know how most fast food joints have security cameras? Well, these ones were different. They were old, outdated, like something from the 90s, with a grainy red light that barely blinked. And they weren't pointed at the counter or the entrance like you'd expect. No, they were pointed right at me, at my table, at my sandwich. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just for security. Maybe I was sitting in the blind spot. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Who installs cameras just to watch customers eat? I glanced over at the sandwich artist again. He was back behind the counter now, talking to someone on the phone, but he kept looking over at me. I could see his lips moving, but his eyes were fixed on me the entire time. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but the tone was low, serious, almost like he was giving orders or getting instructions. Then the power flickered, just for a second, but long enough to plunge the place into darkness and then back to that harsh, fluorescent light. My heart jumped into my throat. The other customers didn't react at all. They just sat there, like mannequins, frozen in time. Even the rough-looking guy by the entrance didn't move. It was like they were all waiting for something, but I had no idea what. I decided it was time to leave. I packed up my sandwich, stood up, and started walking toward the door, trying to keep my pace casual, like I wasn't completely freaked out. But as I got closer, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The door was locked. I tried to turn the handle, push it open, but it wouldn't budge. I looked back at the sandwich artist. He was just standing there, behind the counter, smiling that same eerie smile, like he was waiting for me to figure it out. The other customers hadn't moved. They were all still sitting there, staring at their food, at the tables, at me. Panic started to set in. I banged on the door, called out for someone to let me out, but no one reacted. It was like I wasn't even there. The sandwich artist finally walked over, slowly, taking his time. He got to the door, looked me right in the eye, and said, "You have to finish your meal first." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, stunned, as he unlocked the door, but only opened it a crack. "You can't leave until you've finished," he repeated, his voice low and menacing. "House rules." I glanced back at my table. The sandwich was still there, half eaten, the rest wrapped up in that crinkly paper. It suddenly felt like a trap, like something was waiting for me inside that bread. I thought about just shoving past him, running for it, but something about the way he was looking at me told me that wouldn't end well. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to my table, sat down, and forced myself to take another bite. The sandwich tasted different now, metallic, like blood or something worse. I gagged but forced it down, all while keeping an eye on the sandwich artist. He watched me the whole time, that smile never leaving his face. I took another bite and another, each one harder than the last. My stomach was churning, my head spinning, but I kept going, praying that once it was gone, he'd let me leave. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sandwich was gone. I wrapped up the paper, stood up, and looked over at him. He nodded, almost approvingly, and gestured to the door. "You can go now," he said, his voice soft, almost friendly again. I didn't waste any time. I practically ran to the door, pushed it open, and stumbled outside into the night air, gasping like I'd been holding my breath the whole time. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if he was watching me leave, if those hollow-eyed customers were still sitting there, frozen in place. I just kept walking, putting as much distance between me and that subway as I could. To this day, I don't know what the hell was going on in there. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe it was some twisted joke, or maybe, just maybe, there was something seriously wrong with that place. Something I can't explain. All I know is I haven't been back to a subway since, and every time I walk past one, I can't help but look inside, half expecting to see that guy behind the counter, watching, waiting. So there was this one night I was craving a late night snack. You know how it goes. You get this sudden hunger that just won't go away. I decided to head over to the subway near my place. It was the only thing open that late, and honestly, I was too lazy to cook anything. It was probably around 11 p.m., and the place was practically empty. There was just this one guy behind the counter and me. Perfect, I thought. In and out, quick and easy. I walked in, and the guy behind the counter greeted me with a nod. He had this weird vibe, though. He wasn't smiling, just kind of staring at me like he was sizing me up. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just tired from a long shift or something. I mean, who wouldn't be grumpy working the late shift at a subway, right? Anyway, I started looking at the menu, even though I knew exactly what I wanted. It's just a habit, I guess, to pretend like I'm considering my options. So I go up to the counter, tell him I'll have a foot-long turkey on wheat, all the usual stuff. He nods and starts making it, but he's doing it really slowly, like he's in no rush at all. Meanwhile, I'm just standing there, feeling this weird tension in the air. As I'm waiting, I glance around the place. It's dimly lit, with just a few of those cheap fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The tables are all empty, chairs pushed in like no one's been there for hours. There's this strange silence, too. You know how most places have some kind of background noise? Music playing, people talking, something? But not here. Just the sound of the guy slowly wrapping up my sandwich. He finishes making the sandwich, wraps it up, and hands it over. His hands are kind of shaky, I notice, but again, I just assume he's tired or something. I pay, grab my sandwich, and head over to one of the tables near the window. I sit down, unwrapping the sandwich, trying to ignore the weird vibes. I take a bite, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself, but then I notice something weird. The guy behind the counter is just standing there, staring at me. Not in a casual way, like he's waiting for something. He's just watching me eat. It's unsettling, to say the least. I try to ignore it, focusing on my phone, but I can't shake the feeling that something's off. I glance up again, and he's still staring. Not blinking, just staring with this blank expression on his face. It's starting to creep me out, so I decide to just eat quickly and get out of there. But then he does something really strange. He steps out from behind the counter and starts walking towards me. My heart starts racing, and I'm thinking, what does this guy want? Is he going to say something, or is he just going to keep staring at me? He stops a few feet away from my table, and there's this awkward silence. I look up at him, trying to keep my cool, but inside I'm freaking out. He finally speaks, and his voice is low and kind of shaky. He asks if I need anything else, but the way he says it, it's almost like he's not asking if I need a napkin or a drink. It's like he's asking if I need anything else from him, personally. It's weird, and it's making me really uncomfortable. I shake my head, tell him I'm good, just finishing up. He doesn't move though, just stands there, staring at me for a few more seconds before he turns around and walks back behind the counter. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, trying to brush it off. Maybe he's just socially awkward or something. No big deal, right? I go back to my sandwich, but I can't help but glance up at him every now and then. He's still watching me, but this time he's got this small, almost creepy smile on his face. It's not a friendly smile. It's more like he's amused by something that I don't know about, like he's in on some joke, and I'm not. I'm starting to feel really uneasy, and I decide it's time to leave. I wrap up the rest of my sandwich, grab my stuff, and head for the door. As I'm about to push it open, I glance back, and he's still watching me, that same weird smile on his face. I practically sprint out of there, heart pounding, feeling this mix of fear and confusion. I get to my car, jump in, and lock the doors. I sit there for a moment, trying to calm down. I keep telling myself it's no big deal, just a weird guy, nothing to worry about. But then I glance back at the subway, and I see him standing at the door, watching me through the glass. I start the car and drive off, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turn white. I keep checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following me, but there's nothing, just the dark, empty streets. I try to shake off the feeling, telling myself it's all in my head, but the image of that guy's face, that creepy smile, is burned into my mind. I get home, lock all the doors, and head straight to my room. I try to distract myself with some TV, but I can't focus on anything. My mind keeps going back to that guy, the way he was watching me, like he was studying me. It was just so off. A couple of days go by, and I start to convince myself it was nothing. Just some weirdo, no big deal. But then something strange happens. I start getting these calls on my phone from an unknown number. At first, I just ignore them, thinking it's probably telemarketers or something. But the calls keep coming, and it's starting to freak me out. Finally, I pick up one of the calls, but there's no one on the other end. Just silence. I say hello a few times, but all I get is this faint static noise. I hang up, feeling this chill run down my spine. I have this sinking feeling in my gut that it's him, the guy from Subway. But how would he have gotten my number? I try to brush it off, but the calls keep coming. Every time I pick up, it's the same thing, silence and static. I block the number, but then I start getting calls from different unknown numbers. It's like he's determined to reach me, to let me know he's still there. One night, I'm sitting in my living room, trying to watch TV and forget about the whole thing, when I hear a noise outside. It's this soft, scraping sound, like something's being dragged across the pavement. My heart starts racing, and I feel this overwhelming sense of dread. I go to the window, peeking through the blinds, but I don't see anything. The street is empty, just the usual shadows and parked cars. I tell myself it's probably just my imagination, maybe a stray cat or something. But then I hear it again, closer this time, like it's right outside my door. I tiptoe to the door, holding my breath, and look through the peephole. At first, I don't see anything, but then I catch a glimpse of movement. It's him, the guy from Subway. He's standing on my porch, looking right at the door, his face inches away from the peephole, and he's smiling that same creepy smile. I stumble back, my heart pounding in my chest. How did he find me? Why is he here? I grab my phone, my hands shaking, and dial 911. I tell them there's a guy outside my house, someone who's been stalking me. They say they're sending someone over, but it'll take a few minutes. I go back to the peephole, but he's gone. I look out the window, but the porch is empty. Did I imagine it? Was it all in my head? I sit down on the floor, trying to calm myself, but I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching me. The police show up a few minutes later, but they don't find anything. No signs of anyone around the house, no footprints, nothing. They tell me to call if anything else happens, but they can't do much without any evidence. I feel this mix of relief and frustration. Was it all just in my head? I try to go back to my normal routine, but I'm constantly on edge. Every time I hear a noise, I jump. Every time the phone rings, my heart skips a beat. I keep the doors locked, the blinds drawn, but I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting. Weeks go by, and the calls stop. The strange noises stop, and I start to feel like maybe it's over. Maybe he's moved on, found someone else to creep out. But every time I pass by that subway, I can't bring myself to go back in. I can't even look at the place without feeling this knot in my stomach. Even now, months later, I still think about that night. I still see his face, that creepy smile, every time I close my eyes. I still wonder what he wanted, why he was watching me, and I still get this feeling, late at night when I'm lying in bed, that he's not done, that he's still out there, waiting for the right moment to show up again. Alright, let me tell you about this time I went to a subway late at night. It still creeps me out when I think about it, and I'm not sure if it was just my imagination or something more. But anyway, here it goes. It was one of those long days at work where nothing seemed to go right. I was exhausted, mentally drained, and honestly just wanted to get home and crash. But I was starving, and there wasn't anything in my fridge worth eating, so I decided to stop by a Subway on my way home. It was probably around 9:30 p.m., not super late, but definitely past the usual dinner rush. I pulled into the parking lot, and the place looked pretty empty, just a few cars scattered around. The lights inside were on, but it was dim, kind of like they were getting ready to close up soon. I parked my car and headed in, thinking I'd just grab a quick sub and get out of there. As I walked in, I noticed there was only one guy working behind the counter. He looked tired, kind of like he was counting down the minutes until his shift ended. He gave me a quick nod as I came in, but didn't say much. The place was completely empty except for me, and it felt weirdly quiet. You know how some places have a kind of background noise, like music playing or the hum of conversation? This place was dead silent. I went up to the counter and started looking at the menu, even though I pretty much knew what I wanted. The guy behind the counter just stood there, staring at me. Not in a creepy way, but more like he was just waiting for me to make up my mind so he could get on with it. I finally told him what I wanted, a turkey sub with all the usual stuff. He nodded and started making it, still without saying a word. As he was putting my sandwich together, I noticed something odd. There was a door behind the counter, kind of like a back room or storage area. It was slightly open, and I could see just a sliver of darkness inside. What caught my attention, though, was that every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the darkness. It was quick, like someone or something was moving around back there. I tried to ignore it, figuring it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. But then I noticed the guy behind the counter glancing at the door too. He was trying to be subtle about it, but every now and then his eyes would flick towards it, like he was checking to see if something was there. That's when I started to feel a little uneasy. He finished making my sandwich and handed it to me without a word. I paid, took my sub, and was about to leave when I heard a faint noise coming from the back room. It was this soft, almost scraping sound, like something was being dragged across the floor. I froze for a second, listening, and I could tell the guy behind the counter heard it too because he tensed up. I glanced at him, but he just shook his head slightly, like he was trying to signal me to ignore it. I hesitated, not sure what to do. My gut was telling me to just get out of there, but curiosity got the better of me. I asked him if everything was all right, trying to sound casual, but he just gave me this weird look, like he was debating whether to tell me something. Finally, he just mumbled something about it being a slow night and that they were short-staffed, so he had to take care of some things in the back. I nodded, not really buying his explanation, but decided it was probably best to just leave. I started walking towards the door, and that's when I heard it again. This time, it was louder, more distinct, a definite dragging noise, followed by a soft thud. It sent a chill down my spine, and I turned around to look at the guy behind the counter. He was staring at the door now, and I could see that he was genuinely freaked out. His eyes were wide, and he looked like he was about to say something, but then he stopped himself. I don't know what came over me, but I felt like I needed to know what was going on. I asked him if he wanted me to check it out, maybe call someone for help, but he just shook his head again, more urgently this time. He told me to just go, that it was fine, and not to worry about it. The way he said it, though, made me feel like he was trying to convince himself more than me. I hesitated for a moment, but the look on his face told me to just leave it alone. I nodded, said thanks, and headed for the door. As I was walking out, I heard it again, this soft, almost whispering sound, coming from the back room. It was faint, but it sounded like someone was murmuring something, words I couldn't quite make out. I practically bolted out of there, got into my car, and drove off. As I was pulling out of the parking lot, I glanced back at the subway. The guy behind the counter was still standing there, staring at the door to the back room, like he was waiting for something, or maybe trying to keep something from coming out. I went home, ate my sandwich in silence, and tried to forget about it. But it just kept nagging at me. What the hell was going on in that back room? Was it just my imagination, or was there something really strange happening there? A few days later, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know more. So, I decided to go back to that subway during the day, thinking maybe I could figure out what was going on. When I got there, though, the place was closed. Not like closed for the day, but shut down completely. The windows were dark, and there was a sign on the door saying they were out of business. I felt this weird mix of relief and unease. On one hand, it kind of made sense that the place had closed down. Maybe there was some kind of issue that night, something that had finally pushed them over the edge. But on the other hand, it didn't explain the noises, the way that guy had acted, or what was going on in that back room. I tried asking around, seeing if anyone knew what happened, but nobody seemed to have any answers. The place had just suddenly closed, and that was it. No explanation, no warning, nothing. To this day, I still wonder what the hell was going on in that subway. Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Or was there really something in that back room? And what about the guy behind the counter? Did he know something he wasn't telling me? I'll probably never know, and maybe that's for the best. But every now and then, when I pass by that spot where the subway used to be, I get this weird feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I narrowly avoided something really messed up. And it makes me think twice about stopping at places like that late at night, because you never really know what's going on behind those closed doors.